First COVID cases linked to Wuhan virology staff. Report. U.S. planning to evacuate Americans from Taiwan. Sources. Last Indian reporter in China to leave country this month amid diplomatic row. A report claimed that the first COVID victims were Chinese scientists at a Wuhan laboratory. Substack said the three people who first contracted the lethal virus were Ben Hu, Yu Ping, and Yan Zhu. All three were researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or WIV, the subject of a popular lab leak theory about the origin of coronavirus. Hu is identified as a scientist who supervised the WIV's gain-of-function research on coronaviruses related to SARS. That research involved making the virus more contagious and lethal, supposedly intending to analyze future pandemics. Substack said it collected the information from U.S. government sources. They said, all were members of the Wuhan lab suspected to have leaked the pandemic virus. The article also disclosed, when a source was asked how certain they were that these were the identities of the three WIV scientists who developed symptoms consistent with COVID-19 in the fall of 2019, we were told 100%. Of the three Chinese scientists, Hu and Ping co-authored a paper with infamous Batwoman Shi Zhengli that described the lineage of viruses akin to SARS they had studied for years. Their research also included the novel lineage of SARS-like viruses that SARS-CoV-2 is part of. If true, this information would further strengthen the suspicion that coronavirus was an engineered product that unexpectedly leaked from a laboratory in China. The report says, as such, not only do we know there were WIV scientists who had developed COVID-19-like illnesses in November 2019, but also that they were working with the closest relatives of SARS-CoV-2 and inserting gain-of-function features unique to it. The Chinese Communist Party has always protested the hypothesis. Another recently emerged possibility of the virus's beginning was from animals at a local seafood market in the country. The U.S. plans to evacuate U.S. citizens from Taiwan if the CCP launches a war to invade the island. The Messenger, on June 12th, cited three sources saying that the U.S. is planning to evacuate Americans because of strained cross-strait relations. A source told the news agency that preparations for the evacuation of Americans from Taiwan had been planned for at least 6 months and have accelerated over the past 2 years. According to the source, a heightened level of tension has prompted the U.S. government to act quickly. The source further revealed that Chinese Communist Party, or CCP moves, such as accelerating military development and siding with the Putin government in the Russia-Ukraine war, made the U.S. consider evacuating Americans. A source said that the plan to evacuate Americans from Taiwan is being kept under wraps because it is sensitive to Taipei. When asked by the media for comment on the plan, Pentagon spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Martin Miners said, "We do not see a conflict in the Taiwan Strait as imminent or inevitable." In a related development, Taiwan News reported that on June 13th, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense, or MND, released a civil defense handbook that is 20 pages longer than last year's version. It's worth noting that the handbook has detailed illustrations showing the difference between the uniforms of Taiwanese soldiers and those of the CCP army to facilitate civilian identification. This shows that the Taiwanese government has considered the situation in which the CCP army attacks the island, and the US believes the option to migrate Americans from the island is not without basis. The Chinese government has ordered the last journalist from India to exit its country this month, as relations with its neighbor remain strained. According to Bloomberg, the reporter is from the Press Trust of India, or PTI, the largest news agency of the Asian country. Earlier this year, there were still 4 Indian journalists working in China. Both Beijing and New Delhi have been taking on each other's press workers over the past months. Currently, there is only 1 Chinese journalist remaining in India, but the person is still waiting for their visa to be renewed. 2 others from state media Xinhua News Agency and China Central Television had their visas rejected in May, as per the Wall Street Journal. Bloomberg gathered from sources that the row started when journalists from India employed assistance from their Chinese counterparts. While New Delhi has no specific requirement, Beijing allows only 3 Chinese aides at a time, and they must be hand-picked by the government. This is not the first time China has engaged in a reciprocal dispute over journalist visas. Beijing kicked out several U.S. journalists in 2020 after Washington moved to limit the number of Chinese state media reporters in the U.S. In the same year, Australian journalists had to rush out of China after facing intimidation from its authorities. Meanwhile, both China and India have been at loggerheads over the border in the Himalayan region in the past years. The most recent scuttle occurred last December, when troops from both sides clashed, with injuries inflicted but no deaths.